Thank you. Can you all hear me? Thank you all so much for coming. We'll get started in just a moment. We're closing the library as we're starting our program, so it's kind of an exciting new thing for us. So it might take us just a moment here to make sure that. All right, well, good evening. My name is Alicia Yokoyama. I'm an adult services librarian at Lake Oswego Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Third Tuesday author presentation. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague Alana for working with me this evening, volunteers Jonathan, Jaden, Connor, and Owen for setting up this space, and the Friends of the Library who sponsor this program and so many other cultural and educational events. Sorry, a little winded. Yes. The Friends of the Lake Oswego Public Library is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing enhanced support for library projects of community interest. Please visit the Friends website to learn more about their work, including the boutique used bookstores and how you can join in supporting the library. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Michael Balter, author of the acclaimed crime thriller series featuring Marty, Schott, and Bo Bishop, a series set partly right here in Lake Oswego. Michael Balter is an award-winning author known for his sharp wit and high-stakes crime fiction. Born in Berlin, Balter has led an extraordinary life as a Vietnam War-era air traffic controller, Silicon Valley pioneer, and Oregon entrepreneur. He lived in Lake Oswego for nearly 20 years before moving to Michigan. Please give a warm welcome to Michael Balter.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I actually, there were about 100 people signed up, but St. Patrick's Day, I got 99 cancellations, all in, hi, all in the last, 10 minutes. So thank you, everybody, for showing up. I really, really appreciate it. It is St. Patrick's Day, and I don't have green beer to serve you. Oh, I just thought of this. Perhaps you can get drunk on my words. No, bit of a dad joke. Yeah? Anyways, so yeah. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the Vatican Deal, which was my second book. Let me just show you my intended agenda. We're going to spend a little bit of time about me, very little, I promise. Less than half a slide. Then we're going to look briefly back on chasing money, again, very briefly, only one slide. Then I'm going to read a scene. In fact, my wife reminded me that it is a scene that includes an Irishman. We're going to do that because it is St. Patrick's Day. It'll give you a little bit of a feel for the book. And then we're going to talk about primarily, that's what most of the presentation is about, which is how did the Vatican deal come about? How did the plot get generated? And then after that, I'm going to do a 180, and I'm going to read the first chapter of the third book, which is at the publishers right now, will be coming out first week in July, and honest to God, you're the first people to hear it. So before I get started, how many here have read the Vatican Deal? Oh, wow, very nice. Okay, so for those of you who haven't, hopefully this will encourage you to read it. And for those of you who have, hopefully you won't be too bored. And it might answer some questions for you. Okay, so let's get started. All right, first a little bit about me. It's me. I came late to writing. I didn't start writing till I was retired. I spent the first half of my career as a technologist. I worked for Intel Corporation. I spent the second half of my career being an entrepreneur. I partnered with my very best friend, Roy Rose. And he and I spent 20 years together building up most of the stories that, in fact, are told in the last 3 books that I've written. And so that's in fact, Bo, the main character, one of the main characters is Marty and Bo is modeled after Roy. Marty, everyone asks me, you know, is Marty modeled after you? And Marty in the series is kind of the jerk, you know, the guy who makes all the bad decisions and gets them into trouble. So it's not really me. Bo, Roy, all the way through. Very moral character, never makes a bad move, totally Roy. So when I first got started and I decided I wanted to write a book, I just kind of started and it went absolutely nowhere. I spent about 3 or 4 months just stumbling and fumbling and whatever, and then I would, you know, write something, and then I'd go the next day and I would read what I wrote the day before, and I would kind of throw up a little bit in my mouth and say, oh my God, this is really, really bad. And so, and that's kind of the way it went. And I kind of thought it was just all going to just kind of pass away. It was just one of those things that I had a, you know, fun idea to do, and that it was just going to die a quiet death. And I was talking to my wife about it, and she said, how's that new hobby thing that you're doing? And I said, it's not working out. And she asked me why, and I told her, and we went through this kind of long discussion about it, and she finally said, you know, Michael, she says, I think I know what's wrong. And I said, what? And she said, I've known you for 30 plus years. I've been married to you for 30 plus years, and you're a natural storyteller. You tell stories every day about everything. You can't go to the grocery store without coming back with a story. So I think the problem that you've got is that you're trying to write the story. And I'm going, yeah, uh-huh. And she said, stop writing the story. Just tell it. And I went, what? And she said, just pretend you've run into somebody that you haven't seen in 10 years, and you run into them and you buy them a beer and you say, oh my God, you're not going to believe what happened to me, right? And then just keep going. So I did that the next day. And 2 years later, I had my first novel. And it came out in 2023. It introduced Marty and Bo. It's about 2 entrepreneurs who unintentionally take money from the wrong people. It has kind of that Hitchcockian theme, which is, you know, average, kind of innocent guys get wrapped up in really bad things, okay? And so that was kind of the overall theme. And it did very well, to my surprise. It became a bestseller, and it won, my wife hates it when I talk about this because it's kind of, you know, I'm kind of bragging. But it won 5 national awards, and it was actually Best Crime Thriller for 2023 and also Best Crime Thriller for 2024. So I'm thinking, whoa, yeah, this is kind of cool. So one of the things that I'd been listening to writers being interviewed, and in one of the interviews, a famous writer was talking about it, was giving advice to writers who'd never written before, and he said, if you're just starting out and you've never written anything before, do yourself a favor and write what you know. And I followed that advice. And in fact, the first book, talk about writing what I know, takes place in Lake Oswego, has 2 characters. One of them is my best friend. It's about entrepreneurs. Duh, that's what I was doing. And about 50, maybe 60% of it is all based on stuff or people that I either knew or knew of or had met or had experienced in some way or another. So I truly followed that policy. So now came time for the second book. I knew, especially after the first book did so well, I knew that I kind of had to prove two things, both to myself and to my audience. And those two things always covered the first two books, and only the first two books. The first thing I had to prove with the first book was I can write a book, right? The second thing I had to prove with the second book was that the first book wasn't just luck. So it was like, okay, you know, I got to make this happen. So and how do I do that? Especially I follow the same kind of themes. The first book was about two really average guys who fall into really hazardous circumstances. How do I make two average guys fall into hazardous circumstances again? How do I follow the same thing, which is write what you know, right? And how do I keep it authentic, somewhat real? I don't want to go into science fiction, right? And I don't want to write comic book stuff. And frankly, how do I keep the awards coming, right? So, so that was my challenge. So along comes the Vatican deal. But before we get into the Vatican deal, this is kind of an awkward break. I thought about this when I was practicing this earlier today. I'm going, wow, this is a really awkward break, so forgive me. I'm going to actually read the scene in the Vatican deal, just so that you can kind of get a feel. What did I? Oh, just so that you can get a feel for the book itself. Those of you who read it will recognize the scene. It's one of my favorite scenes, actually, and one of the reasons it's my favorite scene is because it's one of the very few scenes. It's very short, so don't worry, I'm not going to bore you. This thing is like two and a half pages. But one of the reasons I love this scene is because it's one of the very few that I wrote in one sitting, without break, and I never changed it. I never edited it or trimmed it or did anything because I just really liked it. All right. So, can you hear me? Okay. The Vatican deal. Okay. A smell of buttery yeast washed over me as I entered Rione del Fico. The outside air was still brisk, fogging the windows with morning mist. I chose a table far from the entrance, but still within sight of it. A teenage waiter with disheveled hair set a steaming cafe latte before me. I pulled up the collar of my new jacket, almost hiding my face, and waited for Spina to arrive. I'd left Bo sleeping soundly. His body needed to heal, and until I found out what Spina had to tell me, there was no point in disturbing him. I watched rivulets of dew trail down the glass of the entrance door. An elderly couple shuffled in, their worn coats and shoes marking them as locals. Another couple entered, their baseball caps identifying them as tourists. Then came a man in a navy blue peacoat. I recognized him immediately. He was here to kill me. The Irishman, Brodie Lynch. My bladder cramped and I tightened every muscle in my body as he strolled over and sat opposite me. We said nothing to each other for a stretch that felt like hours. I just stared at him. He hadn't changed, except he looked less oily. His dark hair was greaseless, and he'd shaved and lost his black leather jacket. He looked less mugger, more metropolitan, like he'd leapt an entire social class. "You gonna piss yourself?" were his first words. "Fuck you," were mine. "I hoped I'd never see you again," he said. "I hoped you were dead," I responded. The teenage waiter, now in an apron, came to take his order, but he waved him off. "I won't be staying," he said. "Good," I said. "You've been acting the maggot." I didn't answer, concentrating instead on keeping my hands in my lap where I could control their shaking. "You've been running your mouth about getting out of the business deal." He studied my face for a reaction I didn't give him. "You need to stop doing that. It confuses things." I clenched my bladder even tighter. "What's it to you?" "It's nothing to me, but if you keep doing it, I'll have to kill you." If I had a nickel," I shot back. He gave me a derisive grin. "Understand, I don't want to do that. Reaching into his pea coat pocket, he pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Its dented carton looked like a deflated lung, and dropped it on the table. You know the difference between the price of a bullet and a cigarette? He paused and stared hard at me. I stared back. Neither of us blinked. About a dime. The bullet costs more. Don't make me shoot you, sorry ass. I'd rather have a smoke. It saves me a dime. Good to know you're on a budget, I said. You working for Natalia? No. How'd you find us in Rome? I know your meeting schedule. I waited outside the big building and followed you to the fancy tailor. Nice jacket. How do you know our schedule? And why do you care about our deal? Still asking stupid questions. You always did that. How'd you find me? Who do you work for? Who do you care? Why do you care? Sorry. He took a deep breath. 2 years and you've learned nothing. Start asking smarter questions, like how do I keep breathing? I already know, I said. Stay the hell away from you. Smart answer. He leaned forward. And don't piss me off. I stayed silent. Do what you're told, shithead. Buy the damn foundry. Go home. Play with the kids. Pet the dog. You still got the dog? Fuck the wife. You still got the wife? She probably left and took the dog. I've got a mafia family threatening me not to buy the foundry. You threaten me to buy it. You kill me if I don't, they kill me if I do. Feels like a lose-lose situation. The sheer absurdity of the predicament provided a twisted comfort, and the knot of fear in my gut loosened a bit. Don't sweat the small stuff, he said. I tilted my head. The DeLupos are no small stuff. He picked up his cigarettes, stood up, and stuck both hands in his coat pocket. They are to me, he said. He strolled out without looking back. I sat at my table for the next half hour, a fly trapped in amber. Gripped by a cold paralysis, my mind swirled while my body remained motionless. In that horrifying dissonance, I felt like a spectator in the unfolding disaster of my life. Spina Paulo never showed. I walked back to the hotel instead of taking a taxi. Head down, hands in pockets. I stopped looking for the Irishman. I knew he was precisely where he wanted to be, unpacked and living comfortably in my head. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor for the scene. Now back to, as I said, it's an awkward break, guys. So now back to the presentation. So stories. Where do I go? How do I go from chasing money to the Vatican deal? Again, write what you know. The fortunate thing for Roy and myself was that we'd actually accumulated, or collected, if you will, a lot of different stories, because we, being entrepreneurs, we were involved for a short period of time, about 3 years, with the Vatican. Now, the Vatican is kind of a very interesting institution. It represents the largest denomination, the largest religion in the world, and it's completely shrouded in mystery. It gets about, 1 million tourists every year, like Disney World, but there are very few people who actually have ever had to work with or participate with anything having to do with the Vatican and its operation. Roy and I actually did. We were involved with the Vatican. So, how did we get involved with the Vatican? So, back in 2003, Roy and I had a small art company, and it started to grow. It grew pretty substantially. The problem with an art company is that as it grows, you can't just call up the warehouse and ask them to make more art. Art is not a commodity. And so Roy and I, we were like staring at each other going, wow, our growth is severely limited by the supply of art that we could get. And that's when Roy had an absolutely crazy off-the-wall idea. He said, excuse me, my mouth is really dry. No, that's not what he said, but he said, why don't we go to Europe and everywhere else and talk to museums and see, we were primarily a sculpture art business. He said, why don't we see if we can get these museums to let us replicate their sculpture, their three-dimensional art, and we'll pay them a royalty. That sounds insane. Guess what? It worked. We went to the Vatican Museum. We went to the Uffizi Museum. We even went to the museum in the Dalles where there's, Rodin, right? So large museums, small museum, and they all, for the most part, said, yeah, this sounds like a pretty good idea. So we started with the Vatican Museum because, believe it or not, the Vatican Museum, in parallel to this, had a licensing program that came out of the Vatican Library that allowed us to, or basically it sold licenses to allow people to make images or replicate images of the art that's in the museum and also in the library, which basically is only like, 70 million pieces. Not exactly a small inventory, right? So we started with them, and we thought this is going to go. And it took a while to negotiate the contract, but then also, after we got the contract, we spent an awful lot of time kind of back and forth. I'll get into that in a second. So we're keep in mind, collecting stories. Got to have stories for this book. So we're in the process of all this negotiation, and some really cool stuff happened, okay? Some really cool stuff happened. For example, at one time, the American ambassador to the Vatican, a gentleman by the name of James Nicholson, right, called us up and asked us if we would mint a medallion, which I was supposed to bring in, I didn't, medallion for the 20th anniversary for the opening of the Vatican Embassy. And all the VIPs, president and senators and congressmen and all that, they were all going to be there, and we got invited to the celebration, to the party. And we went and we had dinner with the ambassador. That's us right there. And God, I was thin. Anyway, sorry. We had another visit. He invited us again a second time, and we flew to Rome, and I got really sick on the plane ride, and so I couldn't go because I was just violently ill, and so I spent the evening hugging a toilet bowl in our hotel room. Roy and Linda went to the ambassador's house and partied with Tom Brady. A real bummer, okay? So then we also were invited to the 2004 Reconciliation Concert thrown by Pope John Paul II. And again, huge audience worldwide. There were 7,000 guests, and it was no assigned seating. You just went, and just like in a theater, you find an empty row and you kind of pile in, and I was leading the way, and I'm just kind of, and I see an empty row, and of course I'm being very polite, and I just do one of these things, and Roy and Linda and a couple of other people shuffle on in, and then I come in afterwards, and I got to sit at the end. Roy got to sit next to Pavarotti. So, damn you. So another fun story about the Vatican contract was that if you notice that the Vatican seal for the library looks exactly like the Vatican seal for the Vatican. So we had the licensing rights to the Vatican library seal. But because they looked exactly alike, whenever I got a chance to talk to investors or people who were wondering what we were doing, I would conveniently drop the word library and just say, yeah, my company has the global rights to licensing rights to the Vatican seal. And I swear to you, the conversation just completely shuts down. It's like, what? You have what? And yeah. We're not allowed to put them on condoms, but we're okay with pillowcases. So we ended up going for about, I don't know, 6 to 8 months, but we weren't getting any art. And the reason was because our contract was with the Vatican Library, but the art was in the Vatican Museum. Now, they're both separate entities reporting to the same chief, okay? The best analogy I could give you for this is that it would be like as if we contracted with the U.S. Army to retrofit U.S. Navy boats. The Army got the contract, the Navy just laughs at us, right? That's what happened to us. We had this contract, and the museum just said, we don't know, you go away, right? And so we couldn't get our hands on the art. So we took this young man, this very handsome young man named Toby. I don't remember his last name. Toby Gardner. And we sent him to Rome and said, don't come back until you figure out this problem. Because the Vatican invented red tape. That actually came from the Vatican. So you got to figure this out. He didn't. But he came up with something even better. What he came up with was he introduced us to the Curazzi Foundry. Now, all this is in the book, by the way. So not the way I'm telling it, hopefully in a much better way, much more interesting way. So the Curazzi is a foundry that was, it's the second oldest foundry in Italy. It's located in Naples. And it had a very interesting beginning. It served a very niche market. And the market it served around the early 1900s was the museums in Europe. Back in the early 1900s, the museums in Europe were petrified that their art was going to be damaged from 3 possible things: war, vandalism, and fire. Those were all 3 things that back then were a significant problem for those museums. And what they did to kind of hedge their bet is they hired the Curazzi to make molds of their most precious sculptures. Now, the Curazzi worked with something called the lost wax method, which, don't worry, I won't go into it, but what it is, it's a mold that actually is formed from the original piece of art. So in other words, you have to be at the original piece of art, and you've got to really make a model from it. You can't use anything else. So as a result, the actual product that came from that mold is considered in the art world as a true posthumous replica, because it's no different than the artist himself, making a copy of his own work, okay? So this was really cool. And they went, and over the course of about 40, 50 years, they collected about 1,600 molds. What was really fascinating was that the museums would get the replicas. They would then put them in their basement storage, where they would keep them in case something happened to the original. That was their bet, right? But because they were museums, they had no idea what to do. They had no reason to keep the molds. What are they going to do with a mold, right? So they let the Curazzi keep them. And the Curazzi basically collected 1,600 molds, which you could make posthumous sculptures of, and they were almost as valuable as the originals. And here's the kicker. The foundry and all of its inventory was for sale. And they didn't value the molds at the price or the market value of the art, which would have been billions of dollars, okay? They valued it at production cost. So basically, for a few $1,000,000, you could get your hands on, potentially, billions of dollars of art. So Roy and I, we were like high-fiving ourselves. We were going, oh my God, this is unbelievable. This is fantastic, right? So story number 1. Story number 2 is while we were bumping around the Vatican, we also learned about the Vatican Bank. Now, most Catholics, let alone non-Catholics, even knew that the Vatican had a bank. You know why? Because it's not called the Vatican Bank. It's called the Institute for the Works of Religion, the IOR, right? And what they and it was housed in the Vatican Tower, which you have a picture of, right? Which for the previous 500 years was the Vatican prison. It was where the Pope would put the heretics. Okay, so they kind of scrubbed it up on the inside, put a bunch of marble down, and they called it a bank. And from about 1950, and again, all of this history is all in the book, hopefully told in a very clever way. From about 1950 on till about 2017, 2010, 2017, every mafia don and every major rich criminal on the planet wanted to get an account in the Vatican Bank. You know why? Because the Vatican Bank became, over the course of those years, the single largest institution for laundering money in the world. Why? Because you could, if you had an account in the Vatican Bank, which was hard to get, if you got an account, you could transfer all the money you wanted to any bank anywhere in the world, okay? But the bank wouldn't tell anybody. So that's why it was a laundering machine. They would, you had $10 million in the Vatican Bank and you wanted to move it over to Deutsche Bank in Switzerland? No problem. And when they got it, what's the $10 million? Who, from, and where, and why? Sorry, we can't tell you. We're the Vatican. Okay. So all of a sudden, you can kind of see where the dominoes were starting to drop, right? I got a lot of stories here, right? So, wait a minute, okay, the Vatican deal. I'm done. Now, so I, again, remember, write the story that you know, write what you know. And these are all things now that I know, because I've lived them. But the problem was, it would just be a travel log. I was writing a thriller. A thriller needs dead bodies. It needs mayhem. It needs murder. It needs stuff bad to happen. So I did the most obvious thing. I started researching the mafia. Why not? We're talking about Italy. So obviously, go to check out the mafia. I didn't know that much about the mafia other than I'd watched The Godfather about 3 or 4 times, right? So it turns out the mafia is broken up into a whole bunch of different sects or divisions. And there's the Cosa Nostra, which is the Godfather, which is down in Sicily. And then, but around Naples, there's a kind of a sect of mafia that's called the Gomorrah. Turns out that the Gomorrah is also the most violent mafia in all of Italy. They're individual clans, they're individual families, and they're always warring with each other. And I'm doing the research, and as I'm doing the research, I'm finding stories in some major newspapers about something called the Scampia feud. And it turns out that the years that Roy and I were in Italy negotiating for the Curazzi, 2004, 2005, the single largest mafia war in modern Italian history was taking place. Roy and I don't hang around with mafia guys, so we didn't actually know that. Should have maybe invited them over for coffee. But I'm reading about this. I'm going, oh my God, I've got a story, right? Eureka. Hang on. Yeah, there you go. Eureka, I have a story. Marty and Bo, Marty and Bo go to Naples, go to Italy. They want to buy a foundry, like history about the foundry. But there's a mafia family that also wants the same foundry because they want to launder money through the Vatican Bank using the art from the foundry. I have a book. So I write the book. At the end of the book, just a little side story, I give it to my wife to read. my wife reads it, and she says, what was the name of the family? The mafia family? I said, well, it was called the Deloro family. And the reason there was a war was because the old man, the guy who was the leader of the Deloro family, is an incredible, absolute violent human being. But he had just lost his youngest son, to a car accident, long story, and so he decided to retire, and he turned over the running of the family to his oldest son, who was a complete psychopath. He decided to go to war with all the other families, and that was the Scampia feud. And so my wife is reading it, and she said, the Deloros, and you kept the name? And I said, yeah, it's like 20 years ago, and I'm sure they're all dead. Swear to God. She says, how do you know? What if not all of them are dead? What if like one or two of them got away, moved to America, and now they love to read crime thrillers? So I immediately changed the name from the Deloros, which was the real name, to the DeLupos. So that's why the family in the book is called the DeLupo family. Okay. So that's how the Vatican deal was created and written, and those are the stories that are basically the ones that went behind it. You can see it's all stuff that either happened or I experienced or Roy and I experienced, etc. So now, oh yeah, great timing. So now I was told I can't go over 45 minutes. So now, it came out in May of 2025. It won the SIPA Evie Award for Best Crime Thriller for 2025, so I proved my second point, right? And it did very well. It's just like the Chasing Money became a bestseller, and I'm very proud of it. So that being said, hold your questions, because now I'm going to do a 180, and I apologize, it's a very awkward, I'm not really good with transitions, can you tell? So now we're done with the Vatican deal, and I want to read to you the first chapter of the third book. So where the third book is it's the third book in the series. It's after the Vatican deal. It's called Dead Exit. It's coming out in July, the first week of July. It's at the publishers right now. That's why I actually don't have a book. I just have the manuscript here, and it's not in book form yet. And yes, it's gonna come out, and fingers crossed it will do well. And what I wanted to do now, because you're the first ones to get a chance to hear it, is I want to read to you chapter 1 for Dead Exit. So, and then we'll be done. You can ask questions or not. Okay. Let's see if I can do this without tripping over myself. Let's see, this goes, okay, it's really only very short. Okay. Chapter 1, The Call. If my phone rings after midnight, someone's been born or someone's died. As far as I knew, no one was expecting. So when my phone rang at 1 a.m., unease settled in before I was fully awake. The Russian accent on the other end didn't help. Marty? Marty Schott? I recognized Natalia's stepson's voice immediately. Yes, Alex. I wake you? No. I glanced at Abby, sprawled on her stomach, one leg over the blanket, the other tucked beneath, her head turned towards me, eyes shut, though stirring. Boomer stared at me from the foot of the bed, ears perked, eyes wide and alert. But you woke my dog. I have a situation. You're making me nervous, Alex. Alex Danilenko, owner of Shangri-La, the most popular strip club in Portland, wouldn't call me at this hour to complain about a bad tipper. I need to talk to Bo right away. Then why'd you call me? I not have Bo's number, but you are on my speed dial. That's not comforting news. Alex kept going. Bo's sister's husband is dead in my parking lot. What did you say? Abby pulled a pillow over her head as I sat up and swung my legs over the side. Boomer jumped off the bed and sat next to me, panting. Tadeo Ramirez, he is Bo's brother-in-law, yes? Yes. He is lying dead in my parking lot. Heart attack? Yes, his heart was attacked by a bullet. Are you serious? I cannot be sure, but it looks like he was attacked by other bullets as well. I should have been picturing Tadeo laying in a pool of blood, but instead the thump of club music blasting through the phone had my mind drifting to naked women spinning in neon around brass poles. Thank God no one can see inside my head. Have you called the cops? It wasn't a stupid question. We all had a thing about not calling the cops. Yes, there is no choice. This can shut me down. I called 911 just before I called you. I glanced at the blue glow of my bedside clock and did the math. Shangri-La would be swarming with uniforms by the time we got there. Try not to say too much, I said. We'll be there as fast as possible. I cannot say too much, Marty. I don't know anything. I groped my way into the hall. My phone's thin light skimmed the floor. Boomer patted after me, sensing something was wrong. Thank God Abby's a heavy sleeper. I speed dialed Bo, but Catherine answered with a slurred hello. Sorry, Catherine. Please pass the phone to Bo. An exhale, a pause, and then his voice. Marty, what's up? Bo answered every call as if it were the start of a new day, fresh, alert, like he just sat down to breakfast. Step out of the room for a second. What? Just step out. I don't want Catherine to see your face when I tell you this. I heard rustling sheets and muttering. Go back to sleep. It's nothing. Then after a beat, who died? Bo and I tend to think alike. Tadeo. What? Are you sure? I could almost hear his heart accelerate. I relayed Alex's call. Bo swore under his breath, then said, I'll pick you up in 20. He did. I was already outside when he pulled up. You tell Abby? He asked, peeling out of my driveway. No. You tell Catherine? I replied, tightening my seatbelt. He shook his head. I knew Bo would take back roads to avoid speed traps, and I braced myself to be tossed around. Neither of us spoke as his racing instincts kicked in and the city blurred in a kaleidoscope of sheen and shadow. Bo's brain was doing the same as mine, sorting through threats and possibilities. Was Tadeo's shooting connected to us? It didn't feel random. Bo and I kept a mental ledger. Bodies never found, acts never reported, debts owed to the living. Was this a new entry? Think it's a message? Bo asked, adjusting his jaw after grinding his teeth. If it is, it's a weak one. Tadeo's, I hesitated, struggling to find the right word, but as usual, I failed. Peripheral. Wow, Marty, your sympathy is overwhelming. He's family, and he works for us. I don't want to be cruel, Bo, but Tadeo's death hits your sister harder than it hits you, and definitely more than it hits me. It doesn't add up. He exhaled and nodded. Bo had hired Tadeo over my objections after his sister Laura asked him to find her husband a job. Tadeo was always between opportunities, and Bo wasn't especially close to either of them. But when their mother died, everything shifted. He stepped into the role of a reluctant patriarch, calling in favors and twisting arms until he found Tadeo an executive position at Corner 24, our chain of convenience stores. I barely knew Tadeo, having met him only a handful of times at Bishop family gatherings, but I'd heard about him. He was a regular topic of family gossip. Bo rarely mentioned him, but others often did. Not kindly, but in a you won't believe what he did today way. Shangri-La is a strange location, I said. What was he doing there? It's weirdly coincidental. Bo glanced over. I don't believe in coincidence, weird or otherwise. Me neither. Have you been going there a lot? He asked. I'm sorry. Have you been going there a lot? I knew why he asked the question. His discretion was admirable. A little, not often. Staying loosely connected to Natalia's stepson, however tenuously, kept me in her orbit. Bo understood this, and since we both knew it, there was no need to say more. That's one of the things I appreciated about Bo. He knew when to leave things alone. Could it be Dmitri? He asked after a long pause. I don't think so. If Dmitri wants to send a message, he'd make sure I woke up next to Boomer's head in my bed. That's you, Marty. What if he wanted to send a message to me? He doesn't. He'd pick me. Bo took a hard left, tires squealing, his face set in a grim line. He squinted at me. Why? I let it hang a minute. Because you never fucked his girlfriend. End of chapter 1. Okay, that's it. Any questions? That's it? So the very first manuscript had Roy Rose's real name in it, not mine. As we were reading it, I think someone, it might have been Linda, said, oh, you know, I don't know. I mean, people always misread, you know, they're going to attribute, all of a sudden Roy's involved with the mafia. And I go, yeah, I get your point. So I said, okay, well, you know, it's Roy Rose. There's an alliteration, and I love that alliteration. And it was Susie, actually, my wife, who she was just sitting on the couch, and she was looking up names, and she said, Bo Bishop. I went, oh, that's it, perfect, Bo Bishop. So that's how I came up with Bo Bishop. Marty Schott was, you know, I always liked the name Marty, and Schott, I don't know, I pulled it out of the air. Yeah. So, any other questions? Yes. Yeah, when I was younger, I read a lot. And the older I got, especially once I partnered with Roy, Roy kept me pretty busy. He's a taskmaster. And so I didn't have as much time to read as I used to. But I loved thrillers, I always have. And yeah, I'm a pretty good reader. I read a lot. Even now, I'll probably do maybe 8 or 9 books a year. I won't finish them. I just start them and then I go, oh, I don't like it. So, yeah. That's one of the things about writing. I didn't know much about writing. I do now. And it actually kind of hurts you because as you start to read and I can immediately sense like lazy, you know, just, oh, come on. You know, so I'm much more critical. Wonderful question. So I'm now because this book is done, so I'm now on to my 4th book. It's a standalone. I needed to take a break. I've been living with Marty and Bo for 5 years, 2018 to now. Well, that's longer. That's 7 years. And you think about them every day. And so I needed a break. And I needed a break because while I was writing this book, I actually found myself like where I'd write something and then I'd look, the next day I'd look at it, I'd read it and I go, you know, that sounds familiar. And I go, wait a minute. I'd go back to an old manuscript and I go, oh my God, Bo said the exact same thing to Marty on page 47 in Chasing Money. So I started finding myself repeating, you know, like little snarky lines or whatever. And I said, no, I got to take a break. So I'm now writing a book that is about it's about modern times, and then also it goes back to 1974, which was my time during Vietnam. And so it's a story about a murder in the current time frame, 2025, that's linked to a murder that occurred in 1974, and how the two cross over. So, and I'm going to finish that hopefully within a year. And then I'm going to go back and write book 4. Book 3, I won't give it away. I promise. Susie's already like flagging me. But it ends in a twist. Okay, and so book 4 will be significantly different because of the ending of book 3. And I have about another 3 books in me that I can think of. Susie wants me to keep it going, so we'll see. But right now I've got 6 kind of plotted out. It is. I don't. But interesting side story. So Chasing Money, if you've read it, has a story in it about a piece of art. Actually, it's a true piece of art. It's the world's most valued lost painting in the world. It's a Raphael portrait of a young man. It was lost in World War II, 1939, out of the Krakow Museum. The Nazis had stolen it, blah, 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 blah. They all think it's still around. They just haven't found it. And I was doing research on it, and I found a book on a character that was very important for the book in order for me to, I had to figure out what happened to the painting. So it's not been found, but moi had to come up with how it was found. Oh, duh. So that was a tough challenge, okay? That was hard. It was like, okay, in real life it's never been found, and I got to figure out how it was found, and I got to make it sound real. So I figured it out. I won't give it away in case you guys want to read the book. But the book that I found was, this character was written in German. And my mother, who was still alive back then, she was 89 years old. I bought the book. It was actually out of print. I found it in a small bookstore in Germany through Amazon, actually. I had it shipped to my mother at 89, who read it, then swear to God, then sent me a 50-page summary, single-spaced, of the entire book in English. I'm like, oh my God. And that's, yeah, so side story, but that's the closest I get to reading German. Anyway. Any others? No questions from the handsome young man right there with the hat?
Well, they're all leaf spoilers, so I want to ask questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes. It's my son. So. And my daughter.
Telling us what happens in the book, is there any, the first two, the big theme, right, is that you're writing what you know.
Yeah.
I know a bit about your life. I think you've run out of stories.
I have.
So what are you going to, what do you know that you're going to tell us?
Nah, I don't know. But I will tell you. But I will tell you because you don't know this. But you should know this because otherwise you won't talk to me. But in this book, your sister gets a full chapter. And you don't. And I really love you, but I just had nothing. I had nothing. She did something that I could put in the book. You know what I'm saying? Sorry.
Too good, Andrew.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, anything else? Probably the first one, only because it was like, this incredible discovery as I was going through. But in all honesty, and maybe it's just because it just was the last book I wrote, I loved writing this one. I've been told by my publisher that this is better than the previous two books. And as I said, the previous two books did quite well. So, but my publisher, my editor actually, not my publisher, said, Michael, you're getting better, and I could feel it. There were just certain things that I did with the first book and even with the second book where there were parts that if I had to go through and edit now, I would say, this is a little self-indulgent and I don't really need this or that or whatever. I'm really big on similes, a little bit too much. Big on the M dash. Where are you? There you are, yes. Big on the M dash, yeah. But I'm getting better with that. So with this book has a lot fewer similes, and my wife and I have this interesting conversation all the time. She reads my stuff as I write it, and I have this bad habit, and this habit is that I love trying to be profound. Where like I want to make some pithy comment about, the human condition, right? And my wife reads that stuff and she goes, "You got to get rid of this junk. It's just, you just want to be quoted, don't you?" And I go, "Yeah, I kind of do. And so it's just self-indulgent, and there's number of places in the first and second book where that's clearly the case. In this one, I really cut that down to almost nothing. So this is a hardcore, straight-through book. So nothing about the human condition. So. In M dash, Kevin Luby, also a great writer, so when I wrote Chasing Money, I sent it out to 50 agents, and they all rejected it, and they all said, because I'm an unknown, and I'm an old guy, and so they probably figured they wouldn't make any money off me. So getting a book published is very, very hard, and so it sat in kind of a metaphorical drawer for about 6 to 8 months while I started writing a second book, which never came to be. And probably will never go back. It was about a hitman, but it wasn't working. And so I got a phone call, long story, but I'll try to cut it short. I got a phone call from somebody who knew Kevin Luby, and they asked me what I was doing, and I said, I'm retired, tried to write a book, can't get it published. And he goes, I know this guy who's a great writer, and you should try to have a cup of coffee with him, and maybe he'll give you some good advice. And that gentleman was right there. And I had a cup of coffee with him. He was incredibly nice to me. I mean, I'm a nobody, and he was incredibly nice to me. Actually gave me like an hour, hour and a half, and said, yeah, I'll read it. And he did, and he came back and he said, you really like the M dash, which is the long dash that basically is a pause. It substitutes for a colon, right? So, but it's very clear that there is that as you're reading it, you then stop, and it's the next thought, right? And I had a lot of them, and so I went through, and I killed about 1,000 of them, and what happened was that got me really enthused again, because it had been sitting in a drawer for like 6 to 8 months, and I kind of, by doing that editing, I had to reread it, and I kind of went, yeah, I kind of like this. And I knew somebody who was associated with publishing. She'd married a very famous writer, a guy by the name of Doug Stanton. He wrote very famous books, In Harm's Way, 12 Strong. These are all New York Times bestsellers. And I gave her the manuscript to read, and she said, no. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, did I offend you? She said, no, but I'm married to Doug Stanton. You know how many people ask me to read their books? Or their manuscripts? She said, if I said yes to every one of them, I'd be doing that all day long. So I said, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I understand. And I left. But you know what I did? I left the manuscript on a thumb drive on her dining room table. She emailed me about 4 days later. And the email read, swear to God, email read, Michael, I know what you did. I read it. It's really good. I'll help you get it published. There you go. There you go. Yeah, and like I said, I don't think I have problems anymore. I mean, these books have done quite well. So, anything else? Well, thank you again, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I think there's a whole bunch of bars just down the street here if you're looking for to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, or a book. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, well, you know all the stories.